Welcome to this podcasting guide, how to be the best podcasting guest. This is about how to become the most sought after and most professional looking and sounding guest you can be on a podcast. Hi, I'm Matt and I'm the founder of Kult Media. And we offer podcast coaching and consultancy and audio production. And I've been working professionally in audio for over 15 years. I'm the former head of audio for Vice Media in the UK and for Rapid Pictures post-production out of West London. And over my time, I have delivered over 550 hours of broadcast credits. I have produced thousands of hours of dialogue, spoken word, voiceover and podcasts. And I have delivered thousands of branded assets to global brands. I've been producing podcasts since 2016, working alongside 20 podcasts, delivering well over 350 podcast episodes. And I'm considered an expert in audio post-production, content creation, and brand and media strategy. Kult Media is built on one clear purpose, that we believe everyone deserves an opportunity to be heard. But I also understand the importance of making a great first impression. So we help experts, entrepreneurs, brands and businesses create content that resonates with what they want to do and makes the right first impression. So as mentioned, today is the 13 top tips to being the best podcast guest. How can you be the best guest possible? Well, let's get into it, shall we? Now I split this workshop into two sections. One is before the podcast and the other is at the podcast recording and beyond. So let's start with before the podcast actually even happens. You've agreed to be on the podcast. What do we do? Now the first recommendation for you as a podcast guest is to check out other episodes of that podcast. Have a listen, see what they're about. You want to make sure that you're in alignment with what they're trying to achieve. Make sure you understand what their objectives are for their audience. What value are you going to bring them and what value can they bring you? Well, you want to understand what the purpose of the podcast is. That's really important. They should be able to share that with you pretty concisely. After that, you want to look into what the talking points are. You want to plan out the talking points. You want to engage in a little bit of discussion, maybe over email or phone call, to discuss how that might come about. You want to understand as a guest what you're trying to achieve for the listener. What does the listener want out of this? What transformation will you provide to that audience? And then you want to glean all of the key information from the podcaster. We know what their purpose is and we know why they want to talk to you. But what's the format? Is it an interview show? Are there other contributors? Is it online? Is it in person? What are the other topics within the series? Is there more you can add to just your interview? Can you open out into a wider scope of what they're trying to achieve across the whole series? And then understand their scheduling. Are they recording and releasing the next day? Is it live? Will you get some assets, some branded assets to share? And then you can ask about the reviewing process. As a guest, you are more than welcome to ask to hear the episode, just to make sure it sounds as you want. Lots of people don't do this because it does take up time, but understanding that review process is important to some guests. Once you've got all the information from your host, you as the guest should give them all the information about you. This includes your bio, a high resolution photo or headshot. Please, high resolution, as high as you can get it. No one wants grainy pictures out there. Find a good headshot. What your social media handles are, what your offers are, what you want to be known for, what your job title is. Oh my God, working in TV for the last 15 years, people lose their minds if they aren't known by the right job title. As a guest, let them know how you want to be spoken to, what you want to be known as, all of that good stuff about you, the podcast guest. And still staying in that before the podcast even happens, talk it up. Someone has asked you to be on that podcast. Talk it up. It gives you something to share with your audience. Let them know that you're going to be on the recording. Share some information about when the recording's happening and why the recording's happening. Why are you being interviewed? It's great content. Just let people know. It's not self-congratulatory, really. Just let people know what you're doing and then they'll keep an eye out for it. So yeah, talk it up. Support that host. Support that podcast. So this is a big one. The first thing to think about if you are recording remotely or you're dialing in from somewhere like the office or home, find the optimal recording space. And the optimal recording space is quiet. AC off, computer fans off, windows closed, doors closed, as quiet as possible. Ideally with a room full of soft furnishings, sofas, open the doors to your wardrobe, curtains closed, rugs, carpets, as soft as possible. In your conservatory is not going to cut it. Try and find as many soft furnishings as possible. And thirdly, as comfortable as possible. A podcast interview can go on for an hour. You want to be sat somewhere that you can sit comfortably for an hour. Fidgeting around and moving will just make you conscious that you're fidgeting, and it'll add noise to the podcast. Be comfortable. Quiet, soft furnishing, comfortable. This next one is a really common one for guests, is not using headphones. Now, if possible, always record a podcast with headphones, right? Make sure you've got some headphones. Now, the primary reason for this is that it prevents a feedback loop where your microphone might pick up the host and it records that loop back. We don't want that. Secondly, it also helps keep you focused and it drowns out anything else that might be taking your attention away from the podcast. Now with headphones, I always recommend wired ones if possible, because I know that Bluetooth can cause some connectivity issues. There might be a delay in what you're hearing. So you might have that classic news reporter. Yes, an answer that way. Try and avoid Bluetooth if possible. If not possible, make sure that if you've got a microphone, that the Bluetooth headphones don't then become the microphone that you're using in your podcast. As soon as you attach a Bluetooth device, it thinks it's king of the castle. So just make sure if you are using headphones that are Bluetooth, that the connectivity is right in the recording app. My next tip for being the best podcast guest is, please do this, notifications off. You're on a podcast recording. Imagine you're entering into a recording studio, even if you're in your office. Turn off those emails, those alerts, those Windows updates, Twitter, all notifications off. I have to remove notifications from podcasts all the time. They're really easy to turn off. And I recommend using airplane mode or do not disturb mode. Now the reason for this is if you put your phone on silent, if you leave that on your desktop, if you still get an alert or a message, that will vibrate. And that vibration will be picked up in the podcast, and that's really hard to remove. It's like a small little saw going off. So yeah, notifications off, just for the hour. Once those notifications are off, make sure you have given a heads up to your colleagues, your friends and your family that you might be sharing the space with. This is more common than you think. People knocking on the door to come in and ask a question, just let people know. Stick it in your shared calendar, give yourself some buffer time to set up. Make sure that you do not want to be disturbed for however long you're recording the podcast. 45 minutes, hour and a half. And pets and kids don't understand what podcasting is. So ensure that they're fed and watered and they're going to be happy for a little while you record your podcast. So yeah, heads up. My next top tip for being the best podcast guest is water. Keep water handy. Make sure that you can hydrate. Your voice will dry out, especially if you've got an 11-minute answer to something you're truly passionate about. Don't let yourself get hoarse and sit there coughing. Make sure you've got some water. Now, if you want to hydrate your vocal cords, ideally you need to be drinking water 45 minutes before you start the podcast, at least. Otherwise, you're just sort of sipping water to ease the strain of a dry voice. And finally, using water as a tactical way of answering questions. Now, if someone's asked you a question and you're not sure on the answer or you want a minute to think about it, having a sip of water is a great way to break that silence. Just take a minute, have a think. Okay, I'm good to go, and then answer the question. You can use it to your advantage as the podcast guest. Now, podcasts are made in a myriad of ways. Ignoring live stream, going live broadcast out into the wild, you will always have the option to edit and curate the content. And a lot of hosts look to do that. to make sure that their audience gets the right content for them. Now, with this in mind, as a podcast guest, this gives you the option to stop and restart. Stop and restart at any point. You might start to answer a question and think, I've gone off piste here. It's okay. Stop, restart the question. Have the host ask the question again. They may ask it in a different way, more concisely, that can help you answer. Now, if you can stop and restart, I always recommend stopping, having a deep breath, and then continuing. This prevents you from trying to pick up the answer. Some people would stumble over a word, and then they feel like they've got to get back into the good answer quickly to make up for that mistake. Stop, breathe. Slower is better. Take a breath and go again. And with the stop and restart approach, you can often come back to subjects later in the show. You could finish the whole show and then you could say to the host, actually, I've just thought of something. Can we go back to this point? Just record it at the end of the podcast, and in post-production, they can slot it in where it needs to. You are in control as the best podcast guest. And you want the best for the listener at the end of the day, right? My next tip is to avoid scripts. Now, this is ironic coming from me because just producing this workshop makes me want to use a script because I don't back myself to say the right things. But I really do recommend that you don't use scripts. It can leave you feeling a bit wooden and rigid. And in fact, using a script often feels a bit false. And the thing about scripts is as well that scripts don't allow for those natural conversation breakpoints. Now, if someone's thinking about a point and they say, I think it was, it was good. Yeah. Those little pauses, a host can come in, they can interject and they can offer and they can steer the conversation and it can move naturally and flow loads more. So avoid those scripts, be yourself, it'll work out, trust me. And my final tip to being the best podcast guest. Remember to promote the show. You finished the recording, you were awesome, you looked and sounded great, you offered tons of value, you loved it. Tell people you're on the show. Bolster your own content with this content that someone else is going to create for you. Share your ideas, start discussion, get out there, help more people. Remember to promote the show. This is the best way to help a podcast grow. And that was it. That was my top tips to being the best podcast guest. If you have any questions or you want any more information about me or my coaching, head to kult.media. That's KULT.media. That's the website. And on Instagram as well, DM me on Instagram, send me a message. And that's KULT.media, kult.media. Thanks for watching. I hope this has been a massive help to you and your podcast guesting in the future.